Great. All right, well, let's get going. Welcome, everyone. This is week 7 of the Planting Our Seeds program in relationship with Grandmother's Voice. You should see spotlighted on your screen right now 2 of my coworkers, Tanya and Nabil. We are Town of Oakville staff, and we are very happy to help assist in moderating this conversation with our program leads, Jody and Sherry from Grandmother's Voice. Before we begin, I have the privilege today of leading us through our land acknowledgement. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis, from the lands of the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron to the Haudenosaunee and the Métis. These lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history, and as we gather here today, on these treaty lands, we are in solidarity with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and we honor and respect the 4 directions, lands, plants, animals, and ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We acknowledge that and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for being stewards of this traditional land and territory. Today, I wanted to direct some special gratitude and thanks to community members who are Indigenous, who have been so kind to me over the past 2 weeks. There has been so much grace that I've experienced in working with Indigenous community members since we began this project. And none of it has really been on display more than since what we've learned at the Kamloops Residential School. It has really been astounding for me, and I think it's a great testament to Indigenous culture that is still alive and thriving here in our community. For example, even after our discussion last week, it was amazing that Indigenous community members were actually reaching out to me to check in to see if I was okay. You know, they know that I have a young child, and they're asking how I was doing, which I thought was amazing. I even took a visit. I mentioned that I was going, after last week, I was going to go down to the Oakville Museum to bring a pair of children's shoes. And, you know, I noticed that it had rained, and, you know, I reorganized, cleaned off the shoes and didn't tell anyone. I told, I think, one internal staff message, and somehow word got to Indigenous community member, and they reached out with a very long, kind email to me, which was just so much grace and gratitude. And I was really just blown away. It's truly astounding, because this grace is often in the face of ignorance, and it's just been really astounding for me to be involved and welcomed into this community. So I thank the Indigenous community members that are here, obviously particularly Jody and Sherry for being so kind and just expressing and showing so much grace over what has been a particularly challenging few weeks. Yeah, I've really been blown away. So I thank you, and I hope that those are lessons that we can ingrain more into mainstream culture all across our community, because it's truly wonderful. Before we start, I'll let Tanya share some instructions for us this evening.
Thanks, Daniel. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, I just want to review the participation instructions for anyone who's new tonight. We do have a lot of people here tonight, so we do ask that everyone use the chat box to communicate. And in previous weeks, this has been a really great way for people to leave comments and post questions, and Daniel will get to the questions throughout the hour. Do look for the hand up feature in the chat box if you also want to ask questions. You can also privately message the host, Daniel, to submit questions or inquiries without any interruption, or if you privately want to message him something specific. Unless otherwise instructed, we ask that you keep yourself on mute. There are a lot of us on here, and we want to make sure that we hear everything from our special guests to our very special hosts. Please respect one another and their perspectives, and please note that this program is being recorded. I also wanted to review the participation agreements. There are 4 agreements that we would like everyone to honor. One is to stay engaged, meaning to remain morally, emotionally, intellectually, and socially involved in the dialogue. Secondly, experience discomfort. This norm acknowledges that discomfort is inevitable, especially in dialogue about race, and that participants make a commitment to bring issues into the open. Thirdly, speak your truth. This means being open about thoughts and feelings and not just saying what you think others want to hear. And lastly, expect and accept non-closure. This agreement asks participants to hang out in uncertainty and not to rush to quick solutions, especially in relation to racial understanding, which requires ongoing dialogue. And now I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Nabil, who's going to review some other information with us this evening.
Thanks. Thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Daniel. I just want to echo what Daniel said about the grace of our Indigenous brothers and sisters in reaching out and making sure that the community is healing collectively. I'm sure some of you are aware of what happened in London just a few days ago, and somebody from the Indigenous community reached out to me to make sure that I'm doing okay, and it means so much. And I'm not gonna lie, it's been a tough week for myself, but just those messages mean so much. It means that there's a shoulder that I can lean on, which we talked about last week. But from our conversation about last week, the identification or the finding of 215 unmarked graves of children, that's not when the grief started. The grief of those families existed from the day that they went to those schools. And that is generational. And so the conversations we're going to be having today can potentially be ones that put it in positions of vulnerability and put us in positions where we get uncomfortable, we get triggered, and we might get re-traumatized potentially. And the intent of this is to have a conversation within a safe space. But if at any point, any one of you is hearing and participating today feels overwhelmed, I highly recommend that we are providing these contact information for you to contact the Indigenous Focus Crisis numbers. These numbers are available 24/7. They're offered at absolutely no cost, and they're there to support because we need support. And there's an Indigenous Focus Crisis number, and then there's a general crisis number, depending on the nature of the crisis, and also for the Lifeline Canada Foundation, they offer crisis support in various different Indigenous languages as well. But the conversation we're going to have today requires us to be vulnerable. The conversations we're going to be having today requires us to be allies for those of us who are non-Indigenous. And the conversation we're having today requires us to be conscious of the power imbalances that has existed in the past and continue to exist today. But that doesn't mean that we don't talk about it. And that doesn't mean that we don't give voice, because it is not my voice, it is not Daniel's voice, and it's not Tanya's voice that matters the most today. It is the voice of our guests, it is the voice of our presenters that matters today. And let us be a willing ear and a shoulder for them to lean on should they wish to do so. And with that, I want to pass it on to Sherry, Jody, and our wonderful guests.
Scano, Miawa, for all of those wonderful words to start this evening. Yeah, it was a wonderful day actually today. Everything about it was, the last couple of days it was like this heavy air, and then today all of a sudden this wind, it's like the perfect breeze. Wherever I went, there was always a perfect breeze. And so having that opportunity now to have a place where Sherry and I can actually go and meet and talk about, what we need to do, have the elders come out, has really been a gift. And all of this, to believe and know that what we've created, this space, the space was created for us, because we just showed up, and it's like we've been there for a long time. And just understanding that, without the people, without our community, we would be alone. We would be alone. And so just acknowledging that all of you have traveled from, your kitchen or your backyard, or maybe you're sitting outside right now and you're enjoying that, the land and the environment outside. It's really important that we, everything that Tanya was reading, those agreements, participation agreements, those are long, like those have been around for a long time, right? Those are agreements have been existing in Indigenous ways of being forever. So I'm sorry, I'm going to cut my opening a little short because I think that background is quite noisy. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being here, and just know that today's going to be really wonderful, and just know that afterwards we can always go outside to the land, and the winds and the air, the sky, the tree, everything was put there for us to help us when we are on a journey like this. And so I look forward to this evening.
Yes, thanks, Jody, and welcome everyone. It has been a very difficult last couple of weeks, and Nabil, my heart goes out to your community as well, and the Muslim community, and knowing that our hearts and prayers are with you and your family, as well as the family members in the family in London. And it is very difficult when we are faced with such racism, when racism is boiling over in our society, and it's just disheartening. And it's one of those things that we are here to tell you some of the things that we know from our perspective. And just from, we've had 8 weeks, we planned an 8-week program. And when we planned it, there was an awful lot of things that we want to talk about, and there was an awful lot of things that we want to say. And when I look back at our schedule, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is a whole semester of learning. And we just touched base on just a few things. And so, the work continues, the work will continue, and everybody is more than welcome to join us as we're doing this work collectively together in the community. Now, just to recap, we've talked an awful lot about, we've spent some time on the Thanksgiving address again, and spoke about how the land acknowledgement really centers us, and why it's important to go beyond that land acknowledgement and to really understand the community that you're living in and working on and live on. We also asked, there was a lot of comments and suggestions, and some hesitancy of Indigenous people identifying who they are in our community of Halton, because there's no place for people like Jody and I to go to be with other people like ourselves. We've heard a little bit about our medicine garden that honors the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And also that the garden is also one of 10 that are in the future prize with David Suzuki. And again, that voting is still going on. We've also told you a little bit about the land that we've got up in Milton and what we're hoping to do up in that center. We also talked a little bit about, migration, a little bit about Indigenous people, and the not migration, but the forced limitation of that. It was, we weren't allowed to leave the reserve because of the Indian Act. And, again, there were some comments in the chat that people wanted to know a little bit more about the Indian Act, and they wanted to learn a little bit more about even the 60 scoop. But this, like I said, it's only 8 weeks and it's only really been 8 hours. And so this stuff goes by really fast. And, we have a lot of topics to cover that we didn't even get to. We wanted to talk a little bit more about children. We wanted to talk a little bit more about the water. And why is the federal government abstaining, the Liberal government abstaining from a vote where they're still punishing Indigenous kids and still discriminating against Indigenous kids? Thank goodness we had other political parties that stood up and said, no, this has to pass. For example, so we haven't even got into, the justice, police, land, media representation. And so as you can see, it becomes a very robust plan that we had, that it was just something that was just, we could kind of segue where we wanted to go. And in light of certain things that have happened in the last couple of weeks, we really wanted to bring voices to to this discussion. And we want to bring the voices of people who have been also left out of the discussion. And we have, and Jody will introduce our guest because, you know, she has such grace when introducing our guests. And I want to just, you know, make a mention that, you know, again, Indigenous people are always very graceful. We've always welcomed, we've always included. And that was the stereotypes and the racism that was placed upon us, that we weren't those kinds of people. And I'm very, 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 very pleased, Daniel, that a couple of members have reached out to you to say, you know, I'm wondering how you're doing. And, you know, we've also received the same emails as well within our community to make sure that we're still holding up, because we're still doing the hard lifting. We're still doing the heavy lifting in this community to really raise that awareness about all the things that we're doing. And so it's really important that we come together, that we talk about these things in a safe but very vulnerable situation that we're all in. Because again, you know, we mentioned this an awful lot in the last couple of weeks, was that this education wasn't in our education system, but now that it is, what are you going to do about it? We're asking for action, and you know, and there'll be other action that we'll be asking at the end of this segment. So I know that we've only got 45 minutes left, and it goes by really, really fast. And we also want to have an opportunity to also listen to our special guest. So Jody, if you don't mind, without further ado, if you don't mind introducing our guest.
Of course, thank you. I just, yeah, I would like to acknowledge that we have a really wonderful community. We know this. We know our Indigenous relatives that are in Halton. You know, they're coming forward. They were on here sharing voice. They're showing support in every way that they can. And, you know, I think right now, and our guest Roberta will, I think her story will show this, that we talk a lot about right now in the world, equity, diversity, inclusion, and, you know, where we are with everything that's happening, that's been, you know, shown that, you know, we had diversity here. It existed here. And so when all of the colonization began, that's when all of the equity, diversity, and inclusion went out the window. And so our community here, we are all, you know, in a really loving place. We all want to learn. We all want to be a part of each other's community. But these systems that started hundreds of years ago to colonize and oppress Indigenous people exist in our communities. And the reality is those organized, like those systems are what's keeping us away from our own community. And so I've heard this spoken by one of the elders in this community. Actually, Peter Schuler said it best at one of our gatherings, Sherry, that, you know, it's those systems that continue to keep our community separated. And so when we started our speaker series in January, and we connected with Roberta Hill and the residential school survivors from the Mohawk Institute Indian Residential School. All of the work that I'm doing right now, just personally speaking for myself, has been a guided journey. I do not make one decision on behalf of even myself unless I'm in that moment, but I'm guided by elders, grandmothers, elders that are guiding me to make sure that I make a decision that's right for all people. Like going back to the one dish with one spoon, or the dish with one spoon. That is what we are guided by. And so when I met Roberta and the group, it was just from my heart that I couldn't understand why. Sorry if I feel a little anger right now, because it just comes out. I don't understand why these people directly affected by the colonization still do not have the one little thing that they ask for, which is a park, a memorial park, something that, you know, our veterans have. And so when I learned this in February, I was like, hey, Roberta, let's get through what we're doing right now, but let's get back to what, you know, what's happening. And I look at this, you know, from afar sometimes, and I wake up and I'm like, pinch me, is this real? that we just happen to be living in real time right now. And the guest speakers that we brought on were real time in our community and in our life, and are a part of everything that we're doing and building. And Roberta is like an amazing woman with passion to support, you know, I don't even know how many residential school survivors that you support, Roberta, and you're a survivor yourself. But we just, as Grandmother's Voice, and me as Jody, I was like, what can I do, Grandma? Like, tell me what I need to do to help you elevate your voice. And so, you know, I just love being around you, Roberta. You're inspiring to me, and just, it's time for the space. It's time for the voice. And so I'd like to introduce Roberta Hill, and you can listen to how wonderful she is yourself.
Oh, thanks, Jody. That was great. You're the one that's such a gifted speaker. Me, I'm just getting old, and I've got a lot to say before I leave this world. So here we go. That's what I'm focusing on. I got a lot to say, but it's nice to be here with everybody. I can tell you a little bit about, because of time, but I'll tell you a little bit about life before residential school, and that was living at Six Nations with my mom and my dad, 7 children. And life was great until 1954. My dad died. By 1957, my mother died. And so that left us orphans pretty much. Even though we had older brothers and sisters, they were already moving on with their life. Some had gone to the States and all that stuff. So what happened with us, and which many First Nations people, is these residential schools were popping up all over, right? They were already there, especially the Mushel was there for a long time. And so in our community, we believed, or the people believed that, okay, I can't support you. I have to get out and work, because a lot of our guys did seasonal work, or they worked in the States, whatever. So it would have been the best place for us as kids to go. You'd have had food and shelter. Somebody would have been looking after you. And so it didn't seem like such a bad thing, I guess, to our elders and the people in our community. And it's so far from what they believed, but this is how residential schools work. They were so segregated, so secretive about a lot of things. I really understand now how they got away with it, you know, and it's mind-boggling, you know. So when my mom got sick in 1957, she was put into a psychiatric facility, and she stayed there. And in those days, if they put you in there, you stayed there until somebody got you out. And so when I think Nabila was that said something about grief, they began, you know, when the kids are, I think when you're first putting them in there, when you lose your children, and that's so true. And looking at it from my mother's perspective now, years and years later, it wasn't just us grieving for my mom. She was grieving for us. And we found out years later, that's exactly what. And I said to her when we finally caught up with her and she got out, my older sister got her out of St. Thomas Psychiatric Facility, and she lived in Brantford. And one of the things that I asked my mom was, did you know where your children were? And she said, no, I thought you were all dead. You know, so that's another side to it, is that who was looking after her? She's got 7 children that she's lost, you know, even though she came to the Mushel a couple of times, they brought her. And they brought her to visit us, but after that we saw no more visits. So, you know, there's that part to it, and I'm sure there was many others. How many kids were brought in from the northern areas? We had kids from all over Ontario, way back far north, in what we called Eskimo kids at that time, the Inuit people. And so they were coming from all over, and I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure there was some from Quebec. And so here you've got all these poor kids coming in, not knowing, you know, like, how could you do this? How could anyone do this, separate children the way they did? And you didn't have any recourse. If they brought you there, you stayed there. I don't ever remember saying, you know, other than the 2 visits with my mom, there wasn't, not that I can recall, any family time where you could actually have social time, even with other families. Or I never saw that there. And so I think it's what Jody said, or whoever was saying, it was deliberate. There was a reason why they did this. They had to separate children. They really did. And that was part of their agenda, right? It's to get rid of you. And the best way to get rid of you is take you away from your family, take you away from your community, deprive you of all of the contacts with language and, you know, how you would have been raised. And so it was very effective what they did, you know, and then putting us in an institution where you have, it's run by the church pretty much. You have 2 church officials that are very much in charge. The administrator of the residential school was the Anglican minister. He had a lot of power over us. He probably had more power over us than the parents did. Because when some people came to take out the kids and say, I want to take them home, he would say no, and he'd find a reason basically to keep them there. But it's just one of those sad situations, I guess. And it's like we were stuck there with no hope, no help, and all of the abuse going on. You know, every day there was somebody doing something, you know, and I don't mean the kid. Well, the kids learned to be abusive as well. I don't, you know, I'm not going to shy away from that one, but that's in an environment where you're teaching violence. What do you think kids are going to learn, right? If you teach them to be predators, if you teach them to keep pounding on people and beating them, it's probably what you're going to get all your life. You know, you're going to learn violence. And not everybody that left there was violent, but you certainly carried the weight of all of those things that happened at the mush hole, having to fight with your friends, you know, those types of things where they made you fight. And that's what they did. Even on the girls' side, we were pushed into, when we first got there, it was like, put you in a circle and they would surround you, one of the other little girls, you'd have to fight with them. And I didn't want to fight with them. And the other little girl that I was fighting with, she was from here too, you know, and they're like, why would they do that? But I think back on it, and I've heard one of my friends from out west, she said, that was the environment. You had to be tough in that environment. So if that was how they were going to toughen us up, then that's what you did. You fought back, you learned how to fight, you know? And that's just the way we grew up. And I grew up angry. I didn't see myself as being an angry person, but I guess I was. People say, well, you're angry, you know, well, you try growing up in that environment. See if you don't have some anger in you, you know, constantly having to fend for yourself as a little kid, learning how to fight, to fend off people, that kind of stuff. Here's the abusers there, the ministers, both those ministers that were running that, they were both pedophiles. So that's the environment that we were in. And that's not a good environment for any child. But because they ran the place, they also segregated us. They split the boys from the girls. Even if my brothers were on the other side, you were not allowed to talk to your brothers. You were not allowed to play with your brothers. So they've already got this system where it's designed to separate. And on the girls' side, what they did was, when we first went there, the older girls had to take, there would be one girl assigned to you. She would be responsible for looking after you. They would not let her, my friend Nori, she took me under her wing. She wanted to take my sister and have 2 under her wing, 2 sisters. And they said, no, wouldn't do that. It had to be somebody else. So there's basically, you're dividing, and keep you away from your brothers. They're also going to keep you away from your sisters. And that's really what they did. So that's why I said I couldn't remember really seeing my older sister too much. I don't remember my one younger sister that much, but I can see why now, looking back. It was designed to really, really pull apart the family. And so those are hard things. Those are hard things for kids to live in that environment. It just was difficult. But when you're a kid and you're put in there, I was told I was never going to leave there. So I had to adjust to what was, thinking that I would be there forever. And when you tell a kid they're going to be there forever, that's pretty hard. That's a pretty hard reality, you know, because I couldn't see anything really distant where I was going to get anything better. You know, it's like, I'm going to be here forever in this place. But eventually we did get out of there. But it was just the environment. And when I think of those children out west in Kamloops, those young kids, the 215 children, I think it's not an impossibility to me to, I've heard so many different stories about the Mohawk Institute that I believe that they will find children there as well. I think they will probably find children at every residential school that have not been accounted for up to now. Just because of the nature of things and how things were run, it seemed like there wasn't that care. They really didn't seem to really give 2 hoots whether you managed to make it through there or not. you know, and when kids left there, they could have said that they ran away. I would have believed them. You know, they were sent to juvenile detention, for sure, I believe that one. You know, anything could have happened. They could have said, oh, they got sick. You know, those types of things. Kids could have disappeared very easily in these institutions and nobody would have been held accountable. You know, that's the way I feel about it. But overall, I would say that it's a pretty harsh environment to put kids in. And some of them were, the youngest I heard was 2 or 3, but I know my friend Nori from out west, she had, they were probably just young teens when she was looking after me, or just before I got there. They had a little baby in the institution, and this little baby was really sick. And she told me this years later. The baby was really sick and had this, you know, really putrid stuff coming out of its mouth. It smelt, you know, around the mouth and the nose. It was really smelly. And those poor young girls were responsible for looking after that baby, changing it, feeding this little one. And for what? It was not their job. If this baby was sick, that baby should have been hospitalized. But see, that's what I'm saying. When I look back on it, and like, they could care less. You know, was it going to cost you $1 to put the kid in the hospital, the baby in the hospital? So it came down to, oh, geez, is this baby worth saving? Is it worth the $1 we have to spend? You know, those kinds of things. And I thought, wow, when I heard about that, and I thought, oh my gosh, poor little ones. You know, but and given the environment, it was run like military, very rigid, very authoritarian school. Line up for this, line up for that. Go down to your meals in single file. And even in the dining room, you can't sit with your brothers. You have to sit in one area for the girls, one for the boys. Staff had a table, a dining table all to themselves. And we could tell that they ate much better than we did. They had good food. You know, we didn't. We had porridge, and it was the kind that, you know, it gets slimy. Kids said there's worms in it, and one kid pointed out that I had a worm in my porridge at that time. And my little friend sitting beside me, we were talking worms in the porridge, and she says, what's that? And she's pointing at my porridge. I looked at it and kind of looked like a worm, but you know what? Push it aside and keep eating, because you don't get another meal. You really don't get another meal if you don't eat. And I didn't want to get in trouble, because you get in trouble if you didn't eat. But we used to hide things, hide them in our cups to try and get away from eating a slimy fish and a disgusting food that they would serve up once in a while, not once in a while, quite often. And that kind of environment. And then the boys, a lot of the boys, like the girls, you were like being trained for like domestic service. They would have to cook and clean. They would have to strip the boys' beds every day to bring them down to the laundry and do the linen. The boys would work the farm. They would milk the cows, you know, get the chicken, the egg, you know, the eggs and stuff like that. And there was one time I had, when we were going into the dining room, we always sat in the same spot. So somebody had left a cup in front of my bowl, and it was full of cream. And that was like really, really unusual. I didn't know who did it, but boy, was that good. We were so grateful when somebody did that. And that was my friend. She told me years later, she says, I got that for you. She said, because that's a treat. We never got those kinds of, you know, that rich milk and cream. It was usually powdered milk or something like that. And they sold a lot of the produce and the milk to Brantford, you know, to make more money, so that we didn't get all of those things. And yet they had a farm. They could have fed us well, you know. And I'm just trying to think what all went on there. I had, as a kid, after I left the mush hole, I actually had, when I was in the mush hole, I used to have these nightmares, and the nightmares were about me falling. I'd fall off the fire escape, and I'd go just zooming down out of nowhere. I wasn't pushed in my dream. I would just fall, and I'd fall, and I'd fall, and I'd land like a feather. But it was so terrifying when you first fall. I fell out the windows. I fell off the fire escape. You know, it was always those recurrent nightmares I had to live with there. And I think it was just because of the environment and who was running the place, Zimmerman. I was scared to death of him because he was my sexual abuser, you know. I was abused in his office. I was abused in the church. Many of the little boys were abused in the church by the other guy. It just seemed to be a rampant, it's an institution for pedophilia, really. That's what it was. And the guys on the boys' side, there was the minister who would assault the boys. There was a guy in the boiler room who assaulted the boys, and there was a few others. And it just seemed to be there all the time. And when you're a little girl, I didn't know all those things. But once you're assaulted, you begin to understand that there's another side to, I don't even know if I want to call that minister a human. You know, there's another side to something that looks like a human. He was more of a beast than a human being, you know, that you can prey on little girls or little boys, you know. So that is, you know, if people who say to us, or anybody says, get over it, they don't know what the heck they're talking about, for one thing. And I'd like to know what the it is that I'm supposed to get over. The fact that you were sexually assaulted, the fact that you're punished all the time for things that you didn't do, the fact that you were forced to eat crap that, you know, disgusting food. Is it the fact that little guy, John Elliott, ran away 5 times and he's locked in a little closet under the central stairway, deprived of food and water. He had a pot so he could pee in it, and that was basically it. That's imprisoning children. That's not acceptable anywhere, not even then. That was not a form of punishment that was acceptable, but that's what they did, you know. And then they had another room in the boys' side called the press room. And all these years, I did not know all of those things. And then I find out from some of the male survivors what really went on there. And that press room was where they could really beat the hell out of the boys. And they had a strap that hung in there all the time, you know. But I never heard them cry out. But then my time, to me, if you let me play, I would play in the basement or I would play outside. That was important to me, is that I had to get out of there. And that's why the park is really important to me personally, because where the park is going to be, it's 5 acres right beside the old mush hole, you know, right beside the school. But in that time when I was there in the 50s, there was only a small area in that park that we were allowed to play in. It was called the girls' side. It was the playground for the girls. And it was very small, but when you're a kid, it looked pretty big. But that was like, once you're outside, you got your feet on the ground, you can play. There is nothing more healing than being able to be that kid, you know, to play the way kids should play. They should have fun when they're outdoors, you know, and just enjoy what's out there. And it's still today, I enjoy being outside. I do not like high rises. I don't like bricks and all the rest of that stuff. And so it is really important when I talk about the importance of the park. And we were up there talking today about it. And I was thinking, like, they have so many people that go up to the mush hole right now, so much interest. And then when schools open again, they have tours that go up there all the time. And so when I think, if they're going to go inside of anywhere in those schools, in the old mush hole or into the cultural center, they're going to be hearing about all of these horrible things that went on in this school, horrible things done to children. And I thought, well, that's a pretty heavy load. It really is to absorb, even if you're a student. It's hard enough to absorb when you're an adult taking in all this stuff that you're hearing. But I thought, well, you know, this is another side to the park, why it would be beneficial. If you're going to hear all that, and I think like that would be a really opportune time if the park was done. You could come over here, you could unwind, you could relax, you could really get the stress out just by leaving that other building and coming over to this side where there's peace, you know, put your feet on the ground, get grounded, you know. So it has another purpose there besides, you know, the many other reasons why you'd have a park. But the Memorial Park is, I would say it's really, really necessary, because this is a time in history that went on for, our school went on for over 142 years. You know, and the last school that closed in Canada was in Saskatchewan in 1996. That's a long history of residential school children being forced to go there or taken, you know, under the Indian Act. Under the Indian Act, they could force your parents to send you to school. If not, they could fine you or jail you. They can just plain take you. So there was a lot of bad things going on then. In 1970, when it closed, I think that was when we left in 1961. Me and my sister went to foster care. But that's just the beginning of the 60 scoop. And so the 60 scoop was just another arm to me of the residential school. And then look what's happening today, higher numbers of children being put into foster care. So I'm not sure what's going on there. but it never seems to end. You know, it never seems to end. And I think of my children, my grandchildren. There's no way anybody's going to take my kids or my grandchildren. You know, my kids are adults now, but my grandchildren they're just so much of a different generation. And like Jody, what you saw with Shelley today, you've seen how impactful her poem was. And she's the next generation down from a residential school mother. She could have been that person. And that's what I found so profound with her poem. She just hit me really hard because she's like one of us. You experience the same thing, only it was your mother after residential school when she's raising her, you know, so that was pretty hard, you know, and I have to, you know, you have to give Shelley a big hug. She went through a heck of a time, you know, and I say, well, I'm so proud of her. She's really come a long way. I didn't know her before, but I know what she's experienced just by reading that poem, having her read that poem. Life was not good from a living with a residential school mother. And I have heard that so many times, you know, why was my mother like this? Why was my grandmother like this? Why was my grandfather, my uncle so mean? Why were they doing this? You know, all of those things. Well, to me, when we left the mush hole, I think of even my friend Bud White-Eye, you know, what chance do you have in life if all you know for, say somebody's raised in a residential school for 11 years and all you know is the violence, the sexual abuse, you know, and you have no help, which we didn't. We were never, ever once offered counseling or anything, no help whatsoever. You just had to endure the punishment and go from day to day, you know, hoping that things get better, try to run away, you'll get punished, you'll get brought back. And so that's a heavy load to put on young kids. They're still minors, they're not adults when they leave, they're usually gone by 15 or 16. But what are they leaving with? They're leaving with a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, you know, and really a lot of us didn't really understand that within ourselves. We just didn't. I wouldn't have known that I had issues with that. I just, you know, you just try to live life after residential school or foster care. That's all I ever did. I never looked back on that. I hid all that stuff, you know, and yet some of them, they don't hide it. They'll say, I wake up every day. I think about residential school. It hasn't left me. Some of them say, I'm not a survivor. I'm still surviving. I haven't gotten over that. I haven't dealt with issues. It's still within them, the pain, you know, so it's done a lot of damage, residential schools. It really has. And so that's kind of where we are, like with residential school. We want this country to acknowledge that this is exactly what happened. We want that park. We want that memorial park because it will stand for the events in history of what you did to, you know, what the government and the churches allowed to happen, or they were part of it, to Indigenous children. They targeted children. Who the hell does that, you know? It's just hard to wrap your head around it, that somebody would go after the weakest and the most vulnerable in society and put all this on a child, you know. It's unacceptable. There is no good answer to that one, why they did it, you know, or even think that they could do it, but they did it, you know, but they don't have any justification. I know they don't, other than saying in textbooks that, oh, we were just trying to educate you. No, you weren't. Absolutely not. You were trying to get rid of us, pretty much. And that's where I am right now. I went on from there. I grew up, you know, and it took me a long time. It takes you a long time to hold your head up and feel worthy. You know, it really does. I went on and you know, by the time I had my 2 kids, I was realizing that somebody could take my kids away. They could say I'm a bad mother. They could have any excuse for taking my kids. But I went back to school, went into nursing. I graduated, was registered nurse for 32 years, retired in 2012. So I said, you know what? I'm the boss here, not them. I'm the boss of my life. And that's where it is. I had to take charge of my life. Hang on for a sec. I got to pass something out the door here. My son-in-law's here. Hang on.
I dropped a book in the chat
Okay.
of Bud Whiteeye. That book from Bud Whiteeye. That's a great book for anyone that feels like they need to dive into the realities of the residential school survivors. I just wanted, I didn't know how far away your door was, Roberta.
Oh, just right here. No, it's okay. He's gone. But Bud's book is really it's an eye opener. It really is. It gives you a glimpse. It doesn't give you all, but it's his experience. And what he's got in the book is, you know what they should have over the gates to the Mohawk Institute? No, he said, you know what they should put over this? Put the gates there or something like that, the gates to hell. And he's right. You know, it was hell for these guys. It really was. They didn't stand a chance, you know. It's just the way it was. And when you're little, and you know, when they take you when you're little, you don't know any different. They tell you this is where you're going to live. This is where you're going to live. You know, you don't have any options of fighting back. But some of the things that Bud Whiteeye will talk about, we're going to have him on next week, Jody. But it's criminal what they did to these kids. It's absolute criminal. You know, and yet nobody will ever get charged with it. Nobody will ever have to answer for it. Maybe one day, in the great beyond, maybe. You know, but that's where I am right now. I just want this part because I think it's an acknowledgement. It'll come from the survivors. This is what we want. We want this part here because we want people to remember what happened to us, what happened to all Indigenous children, you know. So there's events in history, like I said, there's important things in history that need to be remembered, and this is one of them. This is one of them. So.
Roberta, thank you. Thank you so much for just for sharing with us. But I mean, the resiliency that you've sort of accounted for over your life is pretty tremendous. I don't want you to leave here, you know, without just sort of understanding the immense gratitude. We've talked a lot about these experiences in terms of concept or hypothetical, but to speak with someone who's gone through what you've gone through and to have access to you to learn more is really a privilege. And I just, yeah, I hope everyone here, regardless of the denomination or faith that you share, that we extend a prayer for Roberta today when the day closes. Roberta, I know that that you mentioned that you were comfortable with answering some questions from the group.
Yep. Sure.
There has been some posed in the chat, and I'll invite folks if you have some questions to enter them now, and I will do my best to catch up with them. As questions come in, Roberta, I just want you to know also, you don't have to answer any questions. I don't want to re-traumatize or expose you or share realities that you haven't prepared yourself to share, and you frankly don't want to, and you've been more than generous already with what you've been willing to share.
I'll try to answer.
Tamara, I see has there been any administrative staff from the Canadian residential schools that are still alive? Is there any way for these individuals to be charged for any abuse? Is the government doing anything? And then I see a big report was sent to the Pope and asking for an apology. Is there anything really that is holding the individuals, not necessarily the institutions, but the individuals involved to account?
Well, that's a good question because I just found out like 2 years ago, the one minister, not Zimmerman, the other one, he might still be alive. They could hold him accountable, but he's in his 90s. But does that help him escape any punishment? I don't know. He's supposed to be still a minister listed in the Anglican registry, able to perform marriages from what I heard, but unless he passed away in the last couple of years, he might still be around in Toronto. So he's still there. And you know, there are still residential school survivors that are really, really damaged from him. You know, that he should be held accountable. I don't care about your age. You didn't care about a little boy, did you? So don't even use that age stuff on any of us. You know, we were just helpless victims, and you had no problem with that. So we have no problem going after elderly either, because if you hold me accountable, we can hold you accountable. That's
Yes,
it.
ma'am. A question from Lisa. When you were 16, I know you touched on this, but when you were 16, where did you go? What did you do? You mentioned you became a nurse.
Not 16. When I was 6 years old, I went to the mush hole. When I was 10 and a half, around there, 10, I don't know, somewhere around there. We went to foster care. And then from foster care, we went through 3 foster homes. The first foster home was probably more like mush hole, very authoritarian. The mother, the father, and then they had an adult son. It was okay at first, then it became more hands-on with the men and same kind of a sexual things, trying to do things to us and that kind of stuff. So we ended up, it was a bad situation, and I can remember we got kicked out of that one. I didn't care because it was getting physical too, and they slapping me around and stuff like that. So I didn't care if I get kicked out of that one. Second one was a year, and we asked to leave that one too. So didn't have to get kicked out of that one. We found another place to go to. The third one was really good. The third one I liked. She was she was a divorced lady. And I find that one really hard, because usually the government or the children's aid would not have put you in a single home like that with one parent. Okay? But she was the best one. She was actually had her head on straight. She knew how, she had 3 children too. They were all a little bit younger than me. But she was such a nice lady that she understood us. She took the time to talk to us on her level, not this, I'm here, I'm the boss, that condescending level. She was so nice. So I didn't mind staying there, and I stayed there about 3 years. I graduated, went from Pickering. We were in Pickering High School. Graduated from there, but by the time I was 18, I really wanted to go home because I missed my brothers and sisters, and I didn't know what they were, they were doing. When I left, they were just little. They were just little. My little sister was 3. So in my mind, I thought, well, I just left my foster mother a note, thanked her for her care and being so nice to me. And I took the bus out of Toronto and took off on them, and went back home. I got old Bill that was looking after my brothers and sisters. I got him to pick me up in Brantford. And when you come home, it's like, it's not the journey. It doesn't end the way you think you want it to be. It's like you come home and you've missed all those years. I missed all those years of growing up with my brothers and sisters. So I didn't know them. I didn't know them when I did see them. I kind of recognized them, but you've lost those years of, growing up with brothers and sisters. You never get it back. You'll never get it back. And so we came back as strangers. I was a stranger to them. They're a stranger. And that's where it is. You have another journey. You're not done yet. You got home, but you're not done. You got to look at something else. How do I fit in? Your community doesn't know you. Your relatives don't know you. That's what the old Bill said. Well, go on down the road and find your sister, the other sister. So you gotta find your way again. You get through many hurdles, and then you get this one thrown at you. But I'm pretty stubborn, so I did it. It was a tough journey because when you don't fit in like that, what do teenagers do when they have problems? They usually drink, do drugs, that kind of stuff. So I did drink. Got into a few things, but I wasn't a drug person, so I managed. It's like you'll learn. Like me, I learned, and that's not who I wanted to be. I knew I could change. I knew I could do better, so I did. I didn't want to live that life, And so me, in my mind, I didn't have to look at residential school stuff. I hid all that inside my head somewhere because that's how I managed to go through residential school. I could go off in my little brain somewhere. When these people are molesting me or doing whatever, if you don't feel it, they don't hurt you. So I just became very emotionless as a kid and could hide all those things. And that's what I did. And so I learned how to cope at an early age because I had nobody to help me. So those were my problem solving skills, is hide in your brain, don't let them hurt you, keep that wall up, that emotional wall, that where it stops the emotions, you stop feeling. That's what I learned how to do. That's how I got through residential school and through most of my teenage years.
I don't want to let you get away without sharing some of these kind notes here. Claudia is just thanking you so much for sharing, admiring and honoring you so much. Kara has written, thank you for sharing your lived experience and extreme hardship. It takes immense amount of strength and fortitude, certainly. Claire is, there are no statute of limitations on war crimes, and individuals committing such crimes should be held to account. I'm just going to try and get to some of those questions, just noting that there's 5 minutes. I suspect that we may drift over 7 o'clock tonight. I imagine that would be okay. If you have somewhere to go, Roberta, we respect that.
No, I don't. No, that was just waiting for my son-in-law, that's all.
Two questions.
But he's
from
gone,
Mary.
so don't worry about him.
2 questions from Mary. In the school, did they teach children, or did the children learn anything about love through the attempts at religious indoctrination? And what were the children prepared to do when they graduated? So, and graduated's in quotation marks.
Well, to me, it was a very cold, there is no nurturing in residential school. There's no love. And that was one of the bigger losses there. The bigger things that was missing was what we would have got from our parents was that love and that nurturing, that family connection. You know, your mother is your mother. She gave you life, you know, and it just wasn't there. It absolutely wasn't there. What was your other question?
It was just in terms of what their what it seemed that graduates were prepared for when they were to leave residential schools.
Well, you weren't prepared, and some of them left at 14 or 15. Some of them might have stayed at 16. Some went to high school in Brantford, but I know some that just, you know, just go away or whatever. If you leave at 15, 16, what have you got? What kind of good things are you bringing with you is what I want to say. Did we get a good education? No. What we got in education in was how to be violent, how to fight, you know, that kind of stuff. There was no great education that I could think of. That we got the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, that kind of stuff, but I don't. If you went to high school, you probably did better, but for kids that left before that, you left basically on your own, left to fend for yourself in life. And I don't know what life skills we acquired there. You certainly wouldn't have.
There's a few teachers that attend the class, and the question is, what would you like them to share with their students? What would you like them to understand about residential schools?
I would like people to really listen and open their minds and open their hearts. We didn't do this to ourselves, you know, and that's why there's that stereotypical image of lazy, drunken Indians, which I think anybody needs to get rid of. If we were lazy, not lazy, I know a lot of people, hardworking guys, but the drunk Indian, think about why they're drinking. I see homeless Indian guys on the streets in Toronto. My thing is, what got them to that point? Don't just assume that that's all they want to do in life. There's something that happened that put them in that spot, you know, and it's because society has turned on them. They see nothing else. Booze at least gives them some comfort, you know. It may not be the best place, but I bet you guys on the street will tell you, I'm safer here than in that other world that you put me in, you know. So I would just say, listen, and actually even ask people questions, you know, like even that common greeting, you know, hey, hi, say whatever, you know, where are you from? You know, and don't be afraid to have conversations. It's good to open conversations and, you know, just talk about general things until you get to know people, until you understand. And that's what I think half the battle is we've got this image slapped on us that we're just no good residential school kids, that all we wanted to do was drink and party and all the rest of that. Not true. I know lots of, and even in the court system, when I went to court with the lawsuit, one of the lawyers said, oh, we have a registered nurse here. How bad was she harmed? Well, that fool didn't know what I went through. He's making these statements that are really not necessary, and they're unfounded because he didn't know me. You know, it's those types of things. You're already saying I shouldn't even be in that court because you didn't have any problems in court, you know, and that's just wrong. Don't assume that you know everything about a person and what their life was like, because you don't. You know, so I think be kind. That's what my message. Be kind, be respectful.
I see.
And I think we'll all get further ahead if we can be kind and respectful with each other. That's all.
I see it's 7 o'clock now, Roberta. I'm just going to ask that if folks could stop maybe asking any additional questions. So if there are pressing items in the chat, we can get to them. I know if folks have to leave, that's okay. Roberta, are you okay to take a few more questions from the chat that are here?
I'm okay. Yeah.
Can I,
So-
before you go into those though, if you just don't mind, before anybody else leaves, I'd just like to share that Roberta kind of initiated a conversation about like, what can we do? How can we keep these conversations going for the residential school survivors? And so we've created, in collaboration with Grandmother's Voice, with the residential school survivors of the Mush Hole, a speaker series that we started today. It's going to run every Thursday from now until Thursday, September 30th, which is Orange Shirt Day and Residential School Survivor Acknowledgement Day. So you can hear Roberta and like, I don't know how many guests we're going to have on this speaker series, but this is about elevating their voice and helping them reach their goal to have this park. And, you know, Kirsten asked a really great question that I think maybe Daniel, you can read to that, because I think their passion is really with creating space for them to heal.
Yeah, there's a few very deep questions. So I'll ask two so you can have the opportunity to answer. Kirsten asked, beyond the park, or, you know, maybe captured in the park somehow, how would you like to be remembered or have your legacy understood by future generations?
What do you mean by my legacy? The park, or
I think beyond,
like what we're going to do as what we're leaving behind as residential schools, the memorial park?
or even as residential school survivors, or, you know, those who attended residential schools, how would you like your legacy remembered?
Oh, that's a tough one. I may not be able to give you a good answer on that, only because I think what I want people to understand is that people need to realize we were children. We did nothing wrong. It was the adults, the government, the churches, whoever, the powers that be. That's what people need to remember. We didn't create this residential school. We didn't create this. Our parents didn't create it. Nobody created this. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, what I want people to understand and for them to remember is that children were forced into this, and they were either forced in or they were very much blindly misled somehow that this would be the great salvation for Indigenous children. I just think that people need to understand where it all came from, that we were the victims. The church and the government aren't the victims. No way in hell. There's just no way. They victimize children, and that's the way it has to be. You know, they hurt and they harmed a lot of children. That's the legacy that they've done. That's what they've done. And that didn't stop just at us. That legacy, whatever those harms are, it's still trickling through our community. You know, and so it'll take time for us to heal. You know?
Yes. In relation to that, how does one learn to trust after this? Like, how did you learn how to trust?
I don't trust very well.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult to trust institutions, government, that kind of stuff. I certainly don't trust the church because they lie. They lie and they cover up. They've never, ever, ever told the truth about their role in things. They just try to, minimize, and that's about it. And so, no, I don't have any good feelings about the church or the government. It's just the way it is. They have the power. They have the power to either let these things continue, or look how long it took for everybody here to realize that there was a problem with residential schools in Canada.
Yeah.
So if they can do all of these things, they have an awful lot of power to hide a lot. And that's what people need to understand. They need to be uncovered right from the very beginning when they do stuff like this. And like people, I guess maybe they're naive or something. People who seen a school in Brantford, they said, oh, well, we knew that school was there. We just didn't know what it was all about. We knew it was Indian children there. But you see how well it's hidden? It's hidden in plain sight, really. So
Roberta,
it was there all along. It's just that nobody took the time to really examine what was going on.
Roberta, It's the messages are continuing to come, many of which are not questions. I want to make sure that you get all of these very, very, very kind, and each is really expressing gratitude and acknowledging just different parts that I think would be really valuable for you to be able to read one day. So I can send you the text files of some of the comments here, because they're really, really wonderful. And I'm not seeing any other questions. It's a lot of comments and gratitude towards you. So perhaps if it's okay, we will end there for the evening, and certainly encourage folks to visit the Grandmother's Voice YouTube so that they can hear more through their speaker series from Roberta and other school survivors. Roberta, I don't really know what to say for what you've given us tonight. We, this being the 7th week of our program, I really didn't expect that before the end of it, we would have the opportunity to have such an impactful moment shared among our community. And I'm so glad that so many people have stuck around for these weeks and been invested in the conversation. There is a lot of learning that is remaining across the country. And it's very, I have a lot of gratitude that folks in our community have shown such interest. I just don't know how to express our gratitude towards you effectively. If any of the other guests or hosts want to take a shot at it, I would imagine the correct words are probably buried in the 60 comments to you that are from virtually all the participants here, just acknowledging your time and commitment to us.
And I'd just like to mention, it's not, oh, sorry. Just on the, you can also find them and follow, go to the Mohawk Village in Memorial Park Facebook page. Grandmother's Voice set up a live stream. So every time we start the interviews, and it just streams right to their Facebook page. So now they'll have their own kind of like show that they can get people in and get them involved.
Thank you. And if you have sent a message in for Roberta, I know I did see some messages come to me as direct messages. When I do save the chat file, it saves only to everyone. So if your message was sent to me, feel free to rewrite in the chat box to everyone so we can make sure that it is received by Roberta. I'll leave the room open for a few moments after we stop our recording so folks can send their messages in, and make sure Roberta receives it. Thank you all so much for this evening. Roberta, thank you. If there's any way the town can be of assistance for anything that you can think of.
This is the assistance. You're listening. This is your assistance. This is how you help. You listen to our voices. This is really helpful. So, yeah.
I'm sorry that did not happen earlier.
That's okay.
We will end that tonight. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next week, which is our last week. I did see some comments in the chat about continuing. I will speak with Grandmother's Voice about maintaining the momentum that we've gathered here this evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.